Silas Thorne was fired 2 days before the first hard frost of 1892. The sky over the Lazy J Ranch was a bruised purple, heavy with the weight of unshed snow. The foreman, a man with a heart like a sun-dried leather strap, didn't even look Silas in the eye. His offense was simple, yet unforgivable to men who valued cattle above family. He refused to abandon his 10-month-old daughter, Lily. The foreman had no use for a cowboy carrying baggage. A cowboy can't chase strays with a crying babe on his saddle, the man had spat, his breath hitching in the cold air. Silas didn't argue. He was a man who saved his words for things that mattered, and the foreman wasn't one of them. He packed his meager belongings into a single burlap sack. He checked the cinch on his saddle one last time, though he knew he wouldn't be riding far. His horse had been reclaimed by the ranch, leaving him with nothing but his boots and his grit. He walked away from the bunkhouse without looking back. He had 2 copper pennies in his pocket and a hole in his left glove that let the biting wind in. He had walked for 2 days across ground hardened by the coming frost.
The vast Wyoming prairie felt like an ocean of frozen grass, stretching toward a horizon that offered no mercy. The sun hung low over the plains like a heavy gold coin, offering light but no warmth. The wind carried the sharp, dry scent of sagebrush and the metallic bite of coming snow. Lily was a tiny spark of life cradled in his aching arms. She was sleeping against his rough linen shirt, tucked deep inside his sheepskin coat. Her rhythmic breathing and the tiny puff of heat from her lungs were the only things keeping him moving. By the time he reached the gate of the Blue Willow Ranch, his boots were thin as parchment. Every step was a battle against the numbness creeping up his legs. The gate was a massive structure, built from heavy cedar reinforced with rusted iron. Beyond it, the Blue Willow looked like a fortress of peace in a harsh, gray world. It was one of the largest surviving ranches outside Laramie, legendary and imposing. Sarah Sterling was wealthy in land and cattle, but dangerously poor in ready cash. One missed payment could cost her everything. Silas stopped for a moment, adjusting his sweat-stained hat to hide his tired, bloodshot eyes. He didn't want to look like a beggar or a broken man.
He wanted to look like a man who could still pull his weight. Dry leaves and loose grit skittered around his boots as he walked the long dirt path towards the main house. The house was a 2-story structure of white timber and stone, standing tall against the wind. A woman stood on the porch, watching his slow approach. She was leaning against a sturdy support beam, dressed in a gown of deep indigo blue. The color was striking against the stark, colorless landscape. Her hair was as dark as a raven's wing, pulled back in a practical but elegant knot. This was Sarah Sterling. The locals in town called her the Iron Widow. They whispered that she was made of cold steel and mountain ice. They didn't mention the reason for the ice. Her husband and young son had both died during the Great Blizzard of 1888. The storm had taken everything she loved in a single white night. Since then, she had run the ranch alone, a woman in a man's world. She allowed no one close enough to hurt her again. She watched Silas approach with a cool, measuring gaze that seemed to see right through his coat. Silas stopped at the base of the wooden steps and tipped his hat with a trembling hand. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice cracking. "My name is Silas Thorne. I'm looking for work." His voice sounded like gravel rubbing together after miles of silence. "I can mend fences, break horses, and do the work of 3 men." Sarah didn't look at his hands first, though they were calloused and strong. She looked at the bundle he held so protectively against his chest. She saw the tiny, tufted blanket and the curve of a small head. "I don't need another ranch hand, Miss Thorne," she said. Her voice was smoother than he expected, like silk over a blade. Silas felt his heart sink like a lead weight in his chest. He thought of the 2 pennies and the long, cold road back to Laramie.
He began to turn away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the world. Then, Sarah stepped closer to the railing, her eyes softening just a fraction. "I don't need a hand," she whispered, her gaze locking onto his. "I need a husband." Silas froze in his tracks. He thought the howling wind was finally playing tricks on his mind. "Ma'am?" he asked, turning back slowly. Sarah's expression hardened, the businesslike mask returning to her face. "My late husband's brother, Edgar, is a greedy man," she explained. "He bought the ranch's overdue mortgage note from a bank back east. He's been waiting for me to fail. The mortgage agreement contains an old partnership clause from my father's time. If I remain the sole operator when the note comes due on January 1st, Edgar can demand full payment. He knows I don't have the cash on hand. He can force a foreclosure and take everything. He plans to take the Blue Willow and sell the land to the railroad for a fortune, unless I am married. With a legal partner on the ranch, the bank must honor the original payment schedule. Edgar loses his leverage and the ranch stays mine." Silas looked at the vast golden horizon of the ranch. He had heard of Sarah Sterling before, even at the Lazy J. Everyone near Laramie knew the story of the Iron Widow who refused to break. "You'd marry a stranger just to keep your dirt?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Sarah looked out over the grass her father had bled for, her eyes flashing with fire. "It's not just dirt, Silas. It's a legacy. It's the only thing I have left, and I see a man who would do anything for his daughter. A man who walks miles through the cold with a child is a man I can trust. You give me the protection of your name and your presence. In return, I give you and that baby a home, a future, and a warm bed." Silas looked down at Lily's pale, sleeping cheeks. He thought of the wolves he had heard howling on the prairie the night before. He thought of the hunger that would soon wake her. "I'll do it," he said. Sarah studied him for a long moment, as though searching for any trace of dishonesty in his face. Then she stepped down from the porch and opened the heavy front door. "Before you promise yourself to this place," she said, "you should know what you are agreeing to protect." She led him through a wide kitchen warmed by a cast-iron stove. Copper pans hung above a scarred wooden table. The house was clean and orderly, but it carried the silence of rooms that had forgotten laughter. At the end of the hallway, Sarah stopped before a narrow door. Unlike the others, it was locked. Her fingers rested on the brass key hanging beside her locket. For several seconds, she did not move. Then she unlocked the door. The room beyond was small. A child's quilt covered the bed. A pair of tiny boots waited beneath a chair. On the windowsill stood a wooden horse with one crooked leg. Silas looked at the toy but said nothing. "My son carved it with his father," Sarah whispered. "He was 7. Her voice remained steady, but her hand tightened around the key. "The storm took them both before I could reach the schoolhouse." Lily stirred inside Silas's coat. Sarah looked at the sleeping child, and something fragile passed across her face. "I have kept this room exactly as it was," she said. "I told myself it was loyalty." She closed the door gently.
But perhaps it was only fear. Silas understood then that Sarah was not asking for a husband because she had stopped believing in love. She was asking because she had already survived losing it once. "I won't ask you to forget them," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I only ask that you give Lily and me a chance to earn our place here." For the first time, the Iron Widow's gaze held no steel, only grief, and the smallest beginning of trust. The agreement was a silent pact made under a violet, unforgiving sky. The following morning, Sarah drove them into Laramie in a sturdy buckboard wagon. The air was crisp and sharp, smelling of impending snow and wood smoke. A justice of the peace married them in a narrow, cramped office behind the courthouse. The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes and smelled of old ink and tobacco. There were no flowers, no music, and no promises of eternal love. Silas held Lily in his left arm while signing the legal register with his right. When the justice finally called them husband and wife, Sarah's hand trembled inside his. It was a brief, electric moment, the first time they had ever touched. By noon, the Iron Widow had a husband, and the fired single father finally had somewhere to belong. They drove back to the ranch in a heavy, contemplative silence. That evening, Sarah placed 3 bowls on the kitchen table before remembering that Lily could not yet sit in a chair. She stared at the 3rd bowl for a moment, embarrassed by the mistake. Silas pretended not to notice. He remained standing beside the doorway, his hat held awkwardly against his chest. Sarah looked up from the stew. "Are you waiting for an invitation?" "I wasn't sure where you wanted me," Silas admitted. "You are my husband now," she said. The words sounded formal in her mouth, almost like something read from a legal document. Sit.
Silas lowered himself into the chair across from her. The stew smelled of beef, barley, and onions. It was the richest meal he had seen in months. He took one spoonful, then stopped. Sarah noticed. Is something wrong with it? No, ma'am. Sarah, she corrected. Silas looked at the food. I was thinking how long it has been since I ate at a real table. Before Sarah could respond, Lily began to fuss inside the basket beside his chair. Silas immediately set down his spoon, but Sarah reached the baby first. She lifted Lily carefully, tested the bottle against her wrist, and settled into the rocking chair near the stove. Lily quieted almost at once. Silas watched Sarah's expression change as the child drank. The hard lines around her mouth softened. You have done this before, he said. Sarah's eyes remained on Lily. A lifetime ago. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and Lily's small, contented sounds. Silas looked down at his bowl. He did not want Sarah to see the emotion gathering in his eyes. For 2 days he had imagined only shelter and milk. He had not allowed himself to imagine this. A table, a fire, a woman holding his daughter as though she mattered. Sarah glanced toward him. Eat before it gets cold, Silas.
He picked up his spoon. Yes, Sarah. It was the first meal they shared as husband and wife. Neither of them spoke about love, but for a few quiet minutes, the house no longer felt empty. When supper was over, Silas quietly gathered the bowls without being asked. Sarah looked up in surprise. You don't have to do that, she said. Silas carried the dishes toward the wash basin. My mother used to say a man who eats at a table ought to help leave it clean. Sarah watched him rinse each bowl with slow, careful hands. There was no pride in the gesture, no performance, only habit.